Yeah, welcome to DeFiChain Demystified, where we dive deeper in special topics around our project. The goal is to bring answers to some tricky questions and maybe bust some myths. We are
Kuegi.
and Lord Mark, and today's topic is...
What are UTXOs and why do we need them?
Fantastic. Kuegi, welcome to the show. Happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm very excited. I'm always excited. I'm easy to get excited here. You prepared a really, really interesting topic. And I think it's a topic that we haven't spoken in any format so far here on DeFiChain. And yeah, I would say we jump right in. It's fun. No, it's not so much fun fact. It's more fact-filled. Fun fact-filled. And you're gonna explain a couple of basics around blockchain and Bitcoin and whatever. But I think that's really, really important to know. So I would say we jump right in. The show is all yours. Let's start. I'm gonna ask you only a couple of really, really newbie questions here because the topic's really, really, juicy.
Yeah, looking forward to that. I mean, it's our classic, but this time I think it's really, really true. The history of UTXOs is the history full of misunderstandings.
Absolutely.
Because actually the whole thing is on the very core of the whole crypto community, say it this way. But I think not many people, or nowadays, not many people understand it correctly. So let's talk about it. First, a bit of a general setting, because UTXOs and how this whole thing works is the basis of Bitcoin. And since DeFiChain is built on Bitcoin from the technology-wise, it's also what DeFiChain is built on. So what we cover today is basically nothing DeFiChain specific, but it's actually Bitcoin specific. So whoever is watching this, this is about Bitcoin. We are now a Bitcoin channel. No, but it's really that's the basic. And today we will cover really, as you said, the basics. And I won't go into the details about the cryptography behind it, about the hashes or whatever, because as I said, it's with Bitcoin. There's a lot of topics for that. There's a lot of both videos about the mathematical stuff behind it. And today I just want to give a bit of a concept-wise how to see that, how to understand that, so that to get a better feeling of how this thing works and plays together.
Exactly. And I want to add to this. So guys, don't be overly worried that it's going to be boring and only Bitcoin. There's a strong, like Kuegi said, a super, super strong connection to DeFiChain because we are built on Bitcoin code. And I want to give a short teaser at the beginning. There's going to be a second part that's then going to be more DeFiChain specific. And I think if you want to understand the second part, it's super important to understand the first part and everything that Kuegi going to explain now. That's absolutely the foundation for that. Right?
Perfect. Exactly. Cool. Yeah. That's what we talk today is the fundamental basis of DeFiChain, which is Bitcoin, but it's the fundamental base of both. So let's jump in. We have a blockchain. People already know that. So a blockchain. when you think about what is a blockchain, it's really, as the word says, it's a chain of blocks where you just have one block after the other, and each block is in some way connected to the other one. Mathematically, there's reasons for that and everything, and you can change previous blocks, but you have just one block after the other. I started not with one, but with 100 because the first block is a bit special, but not go into many details. When you have those chain of blocks, one block basically just consists of a list of transactions. TX stands for transaction. I hope everybody's familiar with that, but yeah. So you have just so one block is just a package of transactions. There is some size limit to the block that you can't get too many transactions in, but that's it what a block is. There's some mathematics around it, but that's what a block is. You have transactions, a list of transactions. One transaction is a bit special. It's basically the first transaction in a block is the so-called Coinbase transaction. It has nothing to do with the company other than they stole the name of it. But the Coinbase transaction is basically where the block reward comes in. So that's the only place where new coins are created when you talk about transactions and the blockchain itself. There you have the reward for getting the block, new coins created in this transaction, and the other transactions are just transactions from one input to the output. So let's look a bit how such a transaction look like. So I think this will get a bit bigger.
That's great.
We just have transaction A, where we say, okay, we have a transaction is a list of inputs on the one side and a list of outputs on the other side, and you pay some fee for it. What's important to understand or to know or keep in mind is a transaction is valid if the sum of inputs is exactly the sum of outputs plus the fee. So actually, when you look at it technically, the fee is calculated by the difference between the sum of outputs and the sum of inputs, and it needs to be a minimum fee. So you can put an arbitrary high fee, so you can theoretically have a lot of inputs and no outputs and just pay a lot of fee for the miner. They would like that, but you can't spend more than you get in. So that's just part of the mathematics behind it. The sum of inputs is exactly the sum of outputs, or need to be higher, and how much higher defines what fee you pay. And the other thing is, one transaction can have inputs from multiple addresses. So here we have a transaction that has inputs from X and an input from Y. Where these inputs come from, we cover in a second. It's just from different wallets. So you have addresses, not wallets, addresses, and those addresses provide the input. And for the transaction to be valid, this transaction needs to be signed by the owners or by the owners of these addresses. That's where the private key comes in. Private key, public key. There's cryptography behind that. But in the end, it's all you need to know or understand is it's possible to sign a transaction that you say, okay, yes, this is, I am fine with that, basically. It's like the guy saying, the owner of X says, this transaction is fine for me. And the owner of Y also says that this transaction is fine for me. And if all owners of the inputs of this transaction sign a transaction and say, that's okay, I like that, you get the transaction is valid, and this is basically then coming into a block, and as soon as it's in the block, that's this distributed ledger where we say, okay, this transaction now happened. We got 1 DFI from X plus 3 DFI from X plus 4 DFI from Y are taken, and they are moved. 2 DFI goes to Z, and 5 DFI goes to X.
Okay.
And 1 DFI is the fee.
Short question here. So that means really in the moment when the transaction happens, actually the sender from the previous transaction have to sign off on it. It's not that they send, let's say input one, Mr. X or address X sent 1 DFI in the past. Even if this transaction is back like a year back, in the moment when I do the new transaction, they have to sign off that this is valid. Is that correct?
In the moment you use this input,
yes.
When you want to do this transaction A, exactly. So, yeah,
that could be a year later after I received it, right?
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't matter when you received
it.
When you spend it, you need to sign that transaction, because this transaction, because of the inputs and everything, this has some properties, and then you sign that this what you have there. Basically, like if you say, I sign this paper. And on this paper, it's mathematically proven that you can't change the paper once you signed it, basically. Otherwise, the signature gets invalid. That's the cryptography behind it. So this is transaction A. That's when a transaction is valid. And now what can we do with this transaction? Because this transaction now means I have 2 DFI in Z, I get 2 DFI to Z and 5 DFI to X. And now I can use this transaction as input, the output of this transaction as an input in a different transaction. For example, I could use this output from the transaction A, this 2 DFI from Z, in a transaction B, where I have only this input, 2 DFI from Z, and send it to wherever. This transaction B, now, as you said, here only Z needs to sign that, and only once he Z creates this transaction B. When they create that, they need to sign that. If they sign it correctly and the correct transaction is sent to the network, miners take the transaction, put it into a pool, into a block, and as soon as it's in a block, it's valid, and whoever gets the output can then spend this output. And X might use this input, this output 5 DFI in the transaction C, maybe add another input and use that. And here we come to an important part of this whole transaction system, is with the thing about change addresses. People heard about it probably, but it's also something that's a bit sometimes hard to understand, because these are the transaction outputs, and you always have to spend the whole transaction output in a new input. So it's not possible to say, Z received 2 DFI here, and he only needs 1 DFI to send to someone. He can't say, I only take 1 DFI as input, because he needs to spend the full 2 DFI. And that feels strange in the beginning when you hear it the first time, but actually that's what we do in our everyday life with cash. Because if I give someone a $10 bill, they got this $10 bill. And if they now want to pay $3 somewhere, you don't take the $10 bill, whip off $3 kind of, and give that $3 part to someone for the $3. You have to give him the full $10. And if you only have to pay $3, they take $7 in whatever coins they have and give you the change. In the cash sheets that we have predefined values, we have the $10 bill. I think I'm with euros I know it, but I think there's a $1 bill, and then there are cents, whatever. But let's say we have a $10 bill, a $5 bill, and a $1 bill. You have the predefined bills. So if you give someone $10 and you only pay $3, you get back a $5 bill and 2 $1 bills.
Absolutely.
In Bitcoin, in DeFi, in the blockchain, in the transactions, we don't have that limitation. So if I give you, or if I use an unspent an output of 10 DFI, and I want to pay 3 DFI, I get back a 7, so a newly created $7 or 7 DFI bill. And I can now have this bill, and I can use that as an input for a new transaction. And that's what basically happens here, where we say, okay, this guy X got 1 DFI, a $1 bill, a 1 DFI bill before, he got a 3 DFI bill before, and person Y got a 4 DFI bill. And they now together buy something that's worth 2 DFI. It makes no sense to put it, but for whatever reason, and they say, okay, we put that together, we take those 3 bills, we give that to someone, and he gives us back a 5 DFI bill, and that 5 DFI bill goes to X, because only one of the 2 persons can get the DFI, the 5.
Maybe somebody would ask now, okay, this is 1, 3, and 4, but this could be any random number, right? This could be 1.77053. So these round numbers are just for example. They could be any number possible in some way.
Exactly. That's what I'm about to say, because I just put nice numbers so that it looks nice.
Yeah.
But that's the nice thing compared to cash, where we say in the blockchain we have any number. We can, when you want to spend 1.356 something, you spend exactly that, and you get the change back. That's also with this change address. When you say you create a new change address, that's where this comes from. Because when you say, okay, you spend 2 DFI and that goes back, it could go back to X. Then it's back to the same address. But it could also go to a new address in your wallet that you own, but no one knows that it's yours. It's a new address. It's a so-called change address where the change is sent to. And then you can use that change, the new address, basically, because it's in your wallet. Your wallet might have a lot of different change addresses, and you use that. It's for privacy. That's a good thing, because if you have input of X and output goes to Z and something, A, no one knows if you paid Z or if you paid A, because both are new, both are different, or both are addresses that are not connected to you, basically, so they don't know, did you pay the one amount or the other. There are some logics behind that, where you could say, based on the amounts that are sent, that's why people say, don't send round numbers. Don't send 10 DFI or 10 Bitcoin to someone. 10 Bitcoin is much, but don't send 10 and then the change is some random number. That's just the difference. Send a not nice number, because then the change is also a not easy to read number, and you can't be sure what is the change, what is the real one, and stuff like that. That's for privacy reasons sometimes. I say, okay, that's why Bitcoiners always promote to use a new change address for every transaction. So no one knows who did you send something to, what is what, who is who, basically.
Okay.
All that stuff.
But it also means, you mentioned they're called exchange addresses. Exchange addresses have, of course, the same address format.
Not exchange, change.
Sorry. The change addresses have the same address format. So you cannot see if it's a change address or whatever address. The format always looks completely the same, correct?
It's a normal address. It's just called a change address because it's used to transfer change to. It's just called a change address. It doesn't matter. Exactly, and that's basically what that is about, how this works with the transactions. And now to what is a UTXO? Because many people know it.
What does UTXO stand for?
Exactly. UTXO is just short for unspent transaction output. Okay. TX for the transaction, U for the unspent, and O for the output. Because as we said, you can only send something that was the output of a transaction before. So in your address, the amount of coins in your address, so your balance in the blockchain, in Bitcoin, and on the UTXO level, on the native level, you don't have a balance. No one actually knows, or there is no number in the blockchain that says address X now has 12 DFI. In the blockchain, in the database and everything, there's just address X has those unspent transaction outputs belonging to him, because that's the unspent transaction output that came into X, and that's what you can use. And that's basically and that's actually the same as we have it when you have in your wallet the cash. Your wallet doesn't say you have $12 in there. Your wallet says, I have a $10 bill, I have a $1 bill, and another $1 bill. And that's your current amount of cash in your wallet. The $12 is a list of what are the unspent transaction outputs from previous transaction that you have, from stuff that came in. And that's your unspent transaction outputs, the whole thing that you can use for a new transaction. So that's what a UTXO is.
I think that's a fantastic example. Thinking that your Bitcoin wallet is a real wallet where you have different bills with different denominations inside, right? I think that's a fantastic example. That is not just all put and mashed together like a potato mash. It's like still separate potatoes next to each other. Okay, cool.
Exactly.
Great example.
And with Bitcoin, it's just that you could have multiple wallets at the same time. And that's the change addresses then. As you said, you have a lot of addresses in your pocket. Okay. So wallets in your pocket are basically addresses in your wallet in the matter. And you could have multiple UTXOs in one address. You could have just one UTXO in your address. That's, for example, and now what do we need them for? I mean, it's already, what do we need an UTXO for? If you want to do a transaction, you need an input. And you only get an input by using an unspent output from a previous transaction. So if you want to do a transaction, you need an input. If you want to keep track of your balances and everything, that's what an UTXO is. And therefore, we need the UTXOs to have the whole system of what balance do you have, who is allowed to send what. It's just who owns what transaction outputs. And if you can sign that new transaction where you say, I own this address, so I sign that this transaction output is now used, then you can spend the output. And it can only be spent once. That's why it's the difference between spent transaction outputs, which are in the past and no longer relevant because they can't be spent a second time, and the unspent transaction outputs, UTXOs.
That means that a transaction actually can have an indefinite number of UTXOs.
Inputs.
Yeah,
input and output.
So unspent transaction become inputs But
Exactly.
it can be an endless list of UTXOs actually getting combined for a transaction.
Yeah, I mean, you have some
Is there
physical limitations.
Okay, that's the question. Is there limitation?
Because the size of a transaction, you have the
Yeah.
size. I don't know if a transaction itself has a size. And honestly, I don't know if there's a limitation to the size of the transaction itself. There is a limit to the
There's a
block
for the
size.
block, okay.
So if you try to make a transaction that's 5 gigabyte, it won't work. I mean, yeah, hard to get that amount of.
That's a lot of data, right? Because the transaction, I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
that's
crazy.
super tiny. Yeah?
But if you look at exchange wallets, when they do outputs where they say they send stuff to users, they usually or often depends on the algorithm from them. They have often one input and a huge list of outputs because they use these funds from this one unspent transaction output, which are, I don't know, 10,000 DFI from the hot wallet of the exchange, and they send it to all those users who requested withdrawals, different amounts, and you have one input and a huge amount of outputs. Same in the other direction, when you have a hot wallet from a exchange where a lot of people deposited stuff from different, they always create a UTXO because every transaction in creates an unspent transaction output in that address. And when they send it to the cold wallet, they take all that inputs and consolidate it to one output of the cold wallet, basically. So you have a huge amount of inputs and one output. That's also what you see when you have the light wallet. Now we are back to DeFiChain, kind of, because in the desktop wallet, you use the UTXOs singular. He just takes what he needs in UTXOs and keeps the others just flying around. So you might have multiple UTXOs in your wallet or in your address, and you can then sign multiple transactions at once. That's also the thing. If you want to send multiple transactions that don't depend on each other, just I want to send to them, then I want to do that, I want to do that, and you want to send them in one block at once, if you have 3 UTXOs, 3 unspent transaction outputs, you can use those 3 to create 3 transactions. Each has one input, and you sign them and send them to the chain, and the chain puts it into the block, all 3 at once. If you have only one unspent transaction output, you can, but not easy. So you can only use this output once in a transaction, create a change address from that, so you get a new output that part of it send you back to yourself, and then you can make the next transaction with that output.
Okay, I
that's
think
also something.
That's very interesting. That means actually, if you see a balance, let's say, of 1,000 DFI, this could be one UTXO. This could be 100,000 UTXO. On the front end, at the user interface, you don't see this, right? Most likely, you can list all these UTXOs then on the command line, right?
In the chain, in the command line, you can say list unspent, and then you see all your unspent UTXOs, also all your UTXOs from your whole wallet, from all addresses. You see this address has this from this unspent, this UTXO is from this transaction, this is from this transaction, and so on.
Fantastic.
And
have you brought us an example how these things look like? Fantastic. Okay.
Thanks for asking.
There we are. Okay, cool. Yeah, that's I think everybody who uses our block explorer is kind of familiar with. But now let's go into the details. What do we really see there?
Exactly. That's just a random example from DeFiScan. So not my wallet or anything. It just took really the first I found on DeFiScan with 2 outputs. And here you just see it's inputs from the same address. So this wallet or this address got inputs 7.4 and an input with 2.6 something. They got this outputs of somewhere in the past. They use this now to send 10 DFI to this new address or this address, whoever, and the change is going back to the same address. So here it's not a change address, and the light wallet doesn't do that. The light wallet, because in the light wallet you have this one address that you use, and you stick to that address. So the light wallet has some special behavior, say it this way. It, on the one hand, always takes all your UTXOs that you have in your address if you make a new transaction, it takes all UTXOs as an input and makes a change back to your address, so it creates you one resulting UTXO. So it's always consolidating that.
So every time I send out, my Light Wallet consolidates all my UTXOs.
Exactly.
That I have then actually, in the next step, only one UTXO in my Light Wallet.
Yes.
Why is Light Wallet doing this? Just to keep the storage low? Or what's any idea what the thought process behind this is?
Honestly, I don't know.
Okay.
On the one hand, it is that if you have a huge amount of UTXOs, you might run into trouble if you have a huge amount of UTXOs with small transactions, with small values, and you try to put all of them in. There might be some troubles in a really huge amount of UTXOs, but usually that's not a problem.
It simplifies the whole thing, right?
Honestly, yeah, I think we would need to ask the developers of the Light Wallet why it's that. I know where it happens in the code, and I think there is it's just not using. It could be built differently, easily. I think it's a bit because it's easier when you say, I don't care about what UTXOs I use, because if you look at that, you want to spend 10 DFI. I know I have 10.1 DFI in my wallet. My whole balance is 10.1. So if someone wants to send out 10 DFI now, I'm say, yeah, fine, that's below my total address. I just take all of them because then it's definitely have enough. As soon as I need to check what UTXOs I need to use to come to this balance and then meet some logic on what's the best to use, it gets more complicated. If I just take all of them, consolidate them, and I'm done, it's easier for the developers, basically. And for the user, it doesn't make a difference, because it's also, if you always have them consolidated, the transaction gets smaller. And the thing is, the smaller the transaction, the less fees you pay, because the fee the minimum fee is per byte that you use in the block.
So it makes complete sense. So it keeps the fees down. If you have 1,000 UTXOs, your fees go up because you have 1,000 times the amount of data that you kind of consume in a block.
It's not directly linear scaling.
But it gets cheaper. Less data is cheaper than more data.
Yeah.
And less
more
data,
transactions in means bigger transaction. More inputs means a bigger transaction means you have to pay more fee, because the minimum fee is 1 file, so last digit 1 per byte, roughly. So if you have a lot of bytes. So this is basically, because it's a minimum fee, probably this transaction took 211 bytes in the block.
Okay, cool.
So that's one possible reason why to use less UTXOs for stuff.
But makes complete sense. Efficiency has to be cheaper, right? So I think that's a good reason already why things are consolidated.
On the other hand, that's also the reason why in the Light Wallet you have to wait for your transaction to happen before you can make a new transaction, because your previous transaction uses all your UTXOs. You don't have a UTXO free to spend. You need to wait for this transaction to get into a block. As soon as it's into a block, you have a free UTXO, because as soon as this transaction is in a block, you get change, and
get
diff UTXO. And with this, you can make a new transaction.
This is
and you can only make a transaction with an UTXO. That's why we need UTXOs.
Fantastic. See, because I saw these questions so many times that people said it's so inefficient, it takes so long, we have to wait so long. Now that's the explanation, actually, why you have to wait that you get actually a UTXO back to do your next transactions. Okay, cool.
Exactly.
Fantastic. I love that. Good, very well explained. Cool.
And basically, that's all there is to say about UTXOs.
Even if there have been so many misunderstandings in the past.
Yeah, and it's actually, as soon as you get this,
it's actually pretty simple.
It's pretty simple. It's if you compare it to the bills and say, yes, in my wallet I have $10 bill, I have a $5 bill, I have a $1 bill, and if I want to pay something, I need to consolidate those bills together to pay 13, or I take one and I get change back to pay 5.5. I don't know.
And people always say fiat is trash. It delivers a very good example here. Actually, it helps
Exactly.
to explain things very well in the crypto world. Yeah. Okay, that's cool. So there's no 13.215 because we combine it. You have different UTXOs. Hey, that's a big learning out of that. Fantastic. There's a little bit of twist to the story. We wanna teaser that. We thought originally we're gonna explain that as well in that video, but we are nearly 30 minutes in, and I think a couple of brains out there are already fried. I think let it sink in. Kuegi is gonna come back in a couple of days, or whenever he has enough time to prepare it, and then we're gonna do part 2. This is then gonna be a little bit more DFI specific, and this is gonna be similar exciting, I hope, and similar interesting. So Kuegi, thanks a lot. I think that was an awesome one. I really loved that. And yeah,
maybe let's add to the teaser, because the next part will be what makes DeFiChain. I don't want to say
you're
better
creating
than Bitcoin,
the new title already, okay?
That's the part. What DeFiChain adds at value to Bitcoin. Okay. Because till now, everything that we have here is what's no difference to Bitcoin, because that's how Bitcoin works, that's how Bitcoin transactions work, and that's how UTXO transactions in DeFiChain work. And DeFiChain build on that the whole other stuff that we are using now and that we like. And the next will explain how.
Okay, so don't miss the other stuff video coming soon, so to say. Yeah. Kuegi, awesome job. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for taking the time to preparing everything. For everybody out there, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I think it was like you got some value out of that. See you at the next episode soon. Thanks a lot and have a good day. Bye-bye.